I am Ibrahim TRAORE, and I have seen the pain of my people, the fear in their eyes, the loss of their homes, the theft of their dreams. But I also see their strength, their courage, and together we will rebuild Burkina Faso into a nation that stands tall, unafraid, and unstoppable.
A green whirlwind is sweeping across Burkina Faso, not to destroy, but to heal. In a world where nations wait for loans to build bridges, where independence is postponed until permission is granted, something unusual is happening in West Africa. One morning, without sirens or orders, over 100,000 Burkinabe citizens stepped into the streets, not to protest, not to demand, but to clean. They held no flags, only brooms. They wore no uniforms, just the pride of a belonging. From the crowded markets of Ouagadougou to the dusty paths of Gawa, they swept. They cleared gutters, scrubbed school walls, and planted trees with their bare hands. Why? Because one man spoke, and the nation remembered who it was. President Ibrahim TRAORE didn't shout from balconies. He whispered the challenge, and it echoed in every alley. If you don't sweep your own doorstep, don't expect others to respect your nation. This isn't just about trash. It's not about sanitation. This is resurrection. A tired land is finding its breath again, not through aid, not through conferences, but through the calloused hands of its own people. So stay with us, because this isn't just another story. It's the future our ancestors dreamed of. It's the quiet revolution, made one broom stroke at a time. If this stirred something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and tell us, when was the last time your community cleaned itself proud? For years, Burkina Faso suffered quietly. Behind the headlines of coups and conflict, something more insidious was eating at the soul of the nation: decay, not just of infrastructure, of pride, of care, of shared responsibility. In cities like Ouagadougou and Bobo-Dioulasso, trash piled high along the curbs. Drainage canals, once built to carry rainwater, became open wounds in the city, clogged with plastic bags, household waste, and the sour smell of neglect. Children played near stagnant water, unaware that with every splash came the risk of malaria. Adults passed by, shoulders hunched, resigned. Complaints became custom. Blame became background noise. It wasn't always like this. Elders remembered a time when cleaning was a ritual, not a punishment. When the first Saturday of the month meant something, when neighbors swept not just for cleanliness, but for dignity. But years of waiting, for aid, for leadership, for solutions, had taught communities something dangerous: helplessness. The air was thick not just with dust, but with the quiet message that someone else, always someone else, should fix it. And then came a whisper that pierced the smog. President Ibrahim TRAORE didn't announce a new sanitation department. He didn't sign a foreign-backed initiative with a ribbon and a podium. He stood quietly and said, "We cannot build a strong nation if we continue to live amidst trash and dirty water." That sentence, simple, unpolished, hit harder than any campaign, because it didn't promise help. It demanded ownership. It did not accuse the people, it invited them. It wasn't a speech about hygiene, it was about destiny, and people heard it. Students with exams, traders with goods to sell, mothers with babies on their backs, all began to look at their streets, their homes, their gutters, not as someone else's problem, but as theirs. It began with talk, then it moved to hands, then to movement. Within days, the national sanitation campaign was no longer a campaign. It was a current, a tide. No one was forced. Yet thousands showed up, broom in one hand, hope in the other. They didn't just clean trash. They reclaimed ownership. They didn't wait for money. They brought shovels, lime, and paint from their own pockets. They didn't seek permission. They created momentum. This was not a government project. It was a people's uprising of care. The streets responded, the walls responded, the children responded. Across towns like Zogona, Tampuy, and Assasgo, trash heaps disappeared. Tree saplings appeared. Public walls wore fresh coats of paint like Sunday best. But perhaps more powerful than the physical transformation was the spiritual one. The people of Burkina Faso began to look at themselves and at each other differently, not as sufferers, but as stewards, not as forgotten, but as responsible. This was more than sanitation, it was sanctification. As TRAORE later put it, you don't ask for freedom while living in filth. Cleanliness is not charity, it's declaration. A declaration that Burkina Faso would no longer beg for dignity. It would build it with its own hands, its own people. If you've ever seen your community wait too long for change, tell us below. What would happen if the waiting ended with you? It began quietly, but then it roared. In just 1 month, over 100,000 Burkinabe, from dusty hamlets to bustling boulevards, stood up with one shared tool, the broom. They didn't wait for weekends. They didn't wait for gloves. They didn't wait at all. Markets like Zogona and Larle, once infamous for stench and clutter, became orderly. Children were seen sorting trash into separate pits. Women, many in their 60s, formed clean village committees, leading by example, not decree. In Ouagadougou, civil servants scrubbed walls they once walked past with indifference. In Bobo Dioulasso, soldiers laid down rifles and picked up shovels to clear clogged canals. In Djibo and Guam, regions often forgotten, men dug deep to reopen long dead water channels, while school teachers repainted blackboards with the same care one might paint a chapel. No one issued memos, no one threatened penalties. But unity, when it becomes visible, is more commanding than law. This was not a sanitation effort. It was a spiritual insurgency, arising against the disease not just of the body, but of attitude. For years, the common excuse had been, that's the government's job. But now voices changed. This street is mine. This mosque is ours. This country is all of us. The streets became cleaner, yes, but so did the language. The pride returned. Over 400 kilometers of urban drainage were cleared. More than 8,000 tons of rotting waste were removed. Hundreds of unauthorized kiosks were dismantled. Thousands of walls, school gates, health posts, public libraries were painted. Tens of thousands of trees were planted along streets, on school grounds, around clinics, like veins of new life running through a body once tired. But the numbers, impressive as they are, can't tell the full story. The real power was in the smiles, in the shared water bottles, in the laughter that rose from mud-splattered clothes, in the silence that followed as neighbors looked at what they had done and realized they didn't need permission to be proud. And then came the resistance, not from the people, but from the old ways of thinking. There were whispers. This won't last. They're just doing it for show. Where's the funding? It's not sustainable. But TRAORE didn't respond with counter-arguments. He responded with expansion. Environmental committees were set up, not with foreign experts, but local volunteers. Monthly competitions between communes began, with rewards not in cash, but in recognition. Military forces were deployed, not to police, but to assist, cleaning abandoned checkpoints and dangerous areas previously off limits. And something changed in the narrative. No longer was the army seen only as a shield, but as a shovel in uniform. Journalists visited and expected chaos. They found communities measuring trash output, like sacred duty. Skeptics waited for fatigue to set in, but instead weekend cleanups became neighborhood rituals. TRAORE's government didn't boast. It supported quietly, providing lime, providing trucks, but never taking the credit, because the credit, finally, belonged to the people. This was not a revolution from above. It was a cleansing from below. The kind of revolution that doesn't break windows, but cleans them. And in that clarity, the people saw themselves anew. In the early days, many people still stood and watched. They folded their arms across their chests, watching groups of young men pushing garbage carts, mothers with their hair tied up, carrying heavy plastic bags, then shook their heads. Everything will be the same again. But it was on the third Saturday afternoon of the first month when the ditch behind Larle Market, which was as black as ink, suddenly flowed again. The gurgling sound of water like a skeptical response. Those who had stood and watched stepped in. No one told them. No one called them. Only the results were big enough to make indifference shameful. The real confrontation was not on the streets. It was in each familiar excuse. I am busy. The state has to do it. This is not my job. The movement hit directly at those very words. And people fought back with action. Schools printed posters reminding students to sort their trash. Churches, temples, and monuments organized Green Sundays. Groups of women turned cleaning into a community ritual, accompanied by long-lost folk songs. Then there is another layer of resistance. Those who are used to occupying sidewalks, setting up kiosks, encroaching on canals, and dumping waste wherever they can. They do not like being disturbed. But when the community stands up together, not to criticize but to create new standards, old habits become out of place. Illegal kiosks are removed not by a cold urban code team, but by their own neighbors, who pat them on the back saying, "We need running water, so our children will not be sick." This is not coercion. It is the restoration of moral order. The mainstream media reports moderately. But on social media, the younger generation has turned the campaign into a new narrative. Before-after videos from TikTok, dirty hands, clean streets, photos, community challenges like 30 days, 30 drains, 100 trees, 100 days. They spread not because of the editing techniques, but because of the honesty of the effort. Sweat on the shirt, muddy hands, the bright smile of an old woman leaning on a broom like a flag. In late-night conversations after a day of cleaning, people talk about more than just trash. They talk about the future, about how to turn this event into a habit, about setting up a small fund in each neighborhood to buy gloves, lime, paint, about teaching children to consider Green Saturday as important as a school test. They realize a country is never cleaned from the capital down. It is cleaned from every alley up. And then came the letters from the diaspora, not with money, but with a promise. We will do the same in our communities. Because sanitation is no longer a Burkina Faso affair, it has become a metaphor for every community that has been taught to wait. When a people understands that they can stand up and clean their own streets, they also understand that they can clean up the remnants of a dependent mindset. At this point, when the numbers have exceeded expectations, when the eyes have changed, the question is no longer, can they do it? But, how long will they keep it up? And that is the next challenge, turning the momentum into a culture, turning the movement into a community institution, turning the broom and shovel into everyday symbols of a proud nation. If you believe that sweeping a street can also sweep away despair, say yes in the comments. The dust settled, the drains cleared, but the real cleanup had just begun. Within just 1 month, Burkina Faso began to breathe differently. In cities, the results were immediate and visible. The air smelled fresher. Mosquitoes retreated. Malaria and dengue cases, once surging during the rainy season, began to drop. Clinics reported fewer cases of diarrhea and skin infections. Public health workers, long overburdened, spoke of unexpected relief. But this was more than a health improvement. It was a shift in civic chemistry. In districts where walls were repainted, residents say they felt safer walking home. In schools where students helped dig waste pits, absenteeism dropped. Teachers noted a quiet pride in students, not from lectures, but from action. Markets once infamous for filth became showcases of order. At Zogona, traders began laying out their goods on clean mats, decorating their stalls with flowers. At Larley, a group of young men started a weekly Green Day, sweeping not just the ground, but also graffiti off walls, with music playing in the background. The campaign even created jobs. Yes, many were temporary, collecting, transporting, sorting waste, but for thousands, this meant food on the table. Some began small recycling operations. Others were hired by municipalities to maintain cleared areas. For a country with high underemployment, this sanitation wave quietly became an economic ripple. But perhaps most powerful of all was trust. In a region where governments are often seen as distant, corrupt, or irrelevant, something unexpected took root. People felt seen. Why? Because the government didn't act like a savior, it acted like a partner. Environmental committees were formed not with elite technocrats, but with local mothers, retired teachers, and mosque elders. They were given tools, not orders, space, not scripts. Municipal staff showed up, not to command, but to carry lime and coordinate trash pickup. Suddenly, the line between government and people blurred, not in chaos, but in collaboration. And in that space, something old and sacred returned: mutual respect. Children began correcting their parents when they dropped wrappers. Grandfathers shared proverbs about cleanliness not heard in decades. A woman in Gawa began writing poems about sweeping as spiritual practice. Her verses shared in WhatsApp groups like gospel. And in diaspora communities, from Paris to Brooklyn, Burkinabe citizens organized mirrored cleanups. They sent photos, short videos, solidarity messages. If our people back home are rising with brooms, we will not sit idle in the comfort of clean streets abroad. Even the continent took notice. Delegations from Mali, Niger, and Ghana visited. Activists from Kenya posted think pieces titled "What We Can Learn" from Burkina Faso. News anchors in South Africa called it Africa's Clean Revolution. Others asked if this could be the next Sankara moment, a model of development built not on charity, but on character. Still, it wasn't all applause. Critics called it performative. Some media questioned sustainability. Foreign observers wondered aloud, is this just a distraction from political instability? But the people's answer came not in rebuttals, but in rhythm. The second month arrived, and cleanups continued. Schools added environmental modules to their syllabi. Friday sermons at mosques mentioned cleanliness, not just as hygiene, but as faith in action. Radio stations launched call-in shows, Cleanest Neighborhood of the Week. Momentum became muscle memory, and in that flow, the broom, once a mundane object, became something more. It became a standard, a sign that a home was proud. A community was awake. A nation was rebuilding itself, not from top to bottom, but from ground to sky. And so, Burkina Faso, once whispered as fragile, began to whisper something else, something stronger. What would happen if we measured development, not by GDP, but by gutters cleared, walls painted, trust rebuilt? This is not the first time Burkina Faso has tried to rise. In 1983, a young revolutionary named Thomas Sankara renamed the nation from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, land of upright people. His vision was not paved with foreign loans, but with integrity, self-reliance, and dignity. He told farmers to grow food, not wait for food aid. He sold the government's Mercedes fleet, he planted trees, he made vaccination a national mission. He once said, "We must produce what we consume and consume what we produce." And for 4 brief, bright years, the continent saw what was possible. Then, the bullets came, the coup, the silence. But seeds don't die that easily. Today, in the sweeping of a street, in the painting of a clinic wall, in the planting of a tree beside a classroom, those seeds are blooming again. And TRAORE, whether he admits it or not, is walking a path first cleared by Sankara. But this time, the footsteps are not just his. They are the people's. And as we watch from Detroit, from New Orleans, from Baltimore, we must ask, when did we stop sweeping our own doorsteps? Because the truth is, this story is not just about Burkina Faso, it's about us. It's about every community that once took pride in its porch, its block, its schoolyard, until that pride was eroded by disinvestment, by disappointment, by being told to wait. We know that story. We know what it's like to be forgotten by institutions, to be blamed for what was neglected, to be told someone else will fix it, to be shamed for conditions we didn't create, and then punished for trying to change them. And that's why Burkina Faso matters, because they are doing something that many of us have forgotten how to do. They are starting with what they have. They are starting where they stand. They are sweeping, not just dirt, but despair. And in doing so, they are reclaiming a truth buried deep in our bones, that self-respect is not granted. It is built. That development is not a gift. It is a discipline. That no president, no program, no politician can replace the power of a people who believe in their own worth. This is not just a story from Africa. It's a mirror. And the question it asks is simple. What would happen if we remembered who we are? If Sankara once woke a nation with words, what could you awaken in your own street, your own church, your own city with your hands? A broom, a shovel, a splash of the whitewash on a battered school wall. At first glance, these are tools of maintenance, mundane, forgettable, but in Burkina Faso, they've become instruments of meaning. Because when an action repeats, not out of obligation, but belief, it becomes a ritual. And when that ritual is shared across cities, across generations, it becomes culture. That's what's happening here. The sanitation campaign began as cleanup. It evolved into collective responsibility, and now it's entering the bloodstream of the nation as identity. Children in Ouagadougou now recite phrases like clean ground, clean heart. Mothers use cleanup time not just to sweep, but to teach. Storytelling over shared effort. Fathers organize weekend green patrols with sons, not for punishment, but as pride training. Elders gather on benches afterward, not to complain, but to reflect. And slowly, something changes. Cleanliness is no longer external. It becomes a way of seeing, a way of belonging. Walls are no longer just structures. They are faces of the community. Streets are no longer paths, they are mirrors. Trash is no longer a problem, it is a question. Will you walk past or pick it up? President Traore's phrase, "If you don't sweep your own doorstep, don't expect others to respect your nation," now appears on murals, on billboards, on classroom walls, but more importantly, it lives in behavior. Because what's happening in Burkina Faso isn't just civic, it's spiritual. It's the return of an ethic, a kind of quiet reverence for place. In Western models of development, change often begins with infrastructure, roads, power plants, policies. But here, change began with the humblest acts of care, cleaning, painting, planting. And in those acts, people found something lost, honor. Honor not based on wealth, not based on status, but based on contribution. In some villages, people now greet each other by asking, "How did your hands serve the land this week?" And that question, simple as it is, carries power. Because it reminds every citizen, you are not just a recipient of the nation, you are a builder of it. That's the true revolution, not in flags, not in speeches, but in the daily decision to treat a shared space like sacred ground. That is how culture shifts. And once culture shifts, it doesn't need funding. It sustains itself, like breath, like heartbeat, like a people remembering their worth. If your street had a slogan, what would it be? Share it below. Let's reimagine what public pride can sound like. From the bustling crossroads of Ouagadougou to the farmlands of Gawa, something has changed. Not just the color of the walls or the smell of the streets or the sound of flowing canals, but the way people see themselves. Burkina Faso, once written off by many as broken, unstable, lost, is writing a new chapter, not in capital letters, but in lowercase acts, not through declarations, but through dedication. A nation is rising, not with loans, but with lime, not with slogans, but with soap, not by waiting, but by working. And in that work, they've uncovered the truth we all once knew, that dignity is not in what we demand. It is in what we do together. This is not a sanitation campaign, it's a revolution of self-respect, a return to what Sankara taught, a blueprint for any people who've been told they are powerless, a message from a small West African nation to the world: start with what's broken, fix it with what you have, let no one clean your home before you do. So wherever you are, whether in Atlanta or Accra, in Chicago or Cape Coast, ask yourself, what is the broom in your hand? What corner of your community needs sweeping? What forgotten pride is waiting to be picked up again? Because change does not always come with a hashtag. Sometimes it comes with dirt under your fingernails and the sound of a street made whole. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this with someone whose spirit could use reminding. Leave a comment with the name of a neighborhood you believe in. Subscribe, because they've hidden our history long enough. Now we speak our future out loud. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. And thank you for believing.